Hello, thanks for joining us. We will get started about 1 minute after the hour. Abigail Robinson, that is way too cute of a profile picture. I'm sorry, that's way too much. Welcome, welcome. If you're just joining us, we will get started about 1 minute after the hour. Thanks for being with us here today.
I don't know why, but I really love the sound of the Zoom doorbell, Brian.
The sad thing is that only you and I can hear it as the hosts.
Oh,
Everybody doesn't get to hear the doorbell
ding
as people enter. Yeah.
It's actually like the same ding dong door, the same sound as my childhood home doorbell.
Good association.
Yeah, right.
Hi, everybody. Glad you're here. We are going to get started in a bit less than 1 minute. Glad to have you with us today. Okay, we are at 1 minute after the hour. I am going to go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Brian Henning. I'm professor of philosophy and environmental studies here at Gonzaga University, our chair of our environmental studies department. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this latest in our environmental studies lecture series for this semester. Before we get started and introduce our speaker, I'd like to bring to your attention that we have an event taking place next week. And it's a really special one that I'm hoping that some of you might consider attending. Gonzaga Law School and Environmental Studies departments are co-hosting with the Washington State Attorney General's Office an environmental justice symposium on race, poverty, and the environment. It's a 2-day event, free and open to the public from 1 to 4 on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So if you go to gonzaga.edu/ENVS events, that's ENVS events, you can find more information about this, or just go to Gonzaga University's main events calendar. You'll also find there at ENVS events other exciting opportunities to participate in lectures for the Environmental Studies department. So take a look at those. I'll put that in the chat in just a minute. As you know, our speaker today is Grace Hope, who's the Pacific Northwest organizer for 350 Washington and a really excellent climate organizer here in Washington State. I've been have the pleasure of working with her and lots of colleagues across the state, and just really was excited at the opportunity to share with some of our students what it's like to be a climate activist, what it's like to try and make change in our community to address the climate crisis. And so I'm happy to turn it over to Grace today. Welcome, Grace. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Brian, so nice to see you, and so fun to be in college again. Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today with you all. My name is Grace Hope, and I use they, them pronouns. And I'll do a good fun introduction here in just a little bit. But I kind of thought I would just talk really broad strokes about what we're about to do together. So I'm really excited to be joining. As Brian said, I work for 350 Washington. I also work for 350.org nationally, and I'm involved in a lot of climate spaces. I'm really looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you all. I'll share a little bit of my story, who I am and what I'm all about these days, and some of my perspectives. And I really especially am excited to share with you all. Well, this last 12 months has been a doozy in the world. And I've had the privilege of being a regional climate organizer during the last year. And yeah, so kind of looking at some of the profound connections and learnings and realizations that have come for me in the past year, and that I hope help you make connections as well. And then we're also going to just talk a little bit about what do we do about this mess we're in, and what does it look like to take action, and why would we take action, and all that good stuff. And then I hope to get through all my fun talking at you part and really open it up to some great dialogue and conversation with those who are interested at the tail end. Yeah, so that's what we're here for. The subtitle of my presentation today is Building Grassroots People Power to End the Era of Fossil Fuels and White Supremacy. And I think maybe I'll just float this as the big question or concern that I have often heard in the past year is oh no, if we focus on one, won't it mess up our ability to focus on the other? And surprise, hint, the answer is no, actually, it's all the same thing. But we'll get to that part. All right, so who am I? My name is Grace, and I grew up actually in Tacoma, Washington, and I live here now. I'm here on ancestral home of the Puyallup people. And I am the Pacific Northwest Regional Organizer. I work for 350.org, which is a global nonprofit fighting the climate crisis. And I support grassroots organizers in a 6-state region, from Alaska to Oregon to Montana, folks all over the ground. I also work in support of 350 Washington, which is a brand new coalition of all 12 350 grassroots climate organizing groups here in the state. And I also work for 350 Seattle, because why not? I like to have my finger in lots of stuff. Yeah, and this is actually a photograph of me that I took last Friday, a week ago. And there's a little story behind this photo. But before we get to that story, I'd really like to get us, we're going to talk about the climate crisis, and that has lots of emotions connected to it, and can feel hard to talk about, and also be connected to a lot of scary feelings, angry feelings, hopeless feelings, all that big stuff. Oh, sorry, wait, my dogs are going to bark. I might have to mute in just a moment. I wanted to share a beautiful short poem with you all that's really, really brought me a lot of hope. And it's an excerpt from this book that just recently came out. Brian's nodding his head. I absolutely love this book, and I highly recommend it. All We Can Save, Courage and Truth Courage and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. It's a collection of works from female authors, all addressing the climate crisis. So here's our poem. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. And that's a poem by Adrienne Rich. And this photograph on the right here, I also took last Friday at the same time as that other photo of me. 24 years ago, my childhood home was demolished in South Tacoma. My family was poor and we were evicted, and it was developed into apartment buildings. We didn't have any power as tenants to stop the process. I grew up in an old farmhouse that was built in the 1890s by a German immigrant family. It was a really special childhood. And when we were evicted and had to move on, we started a new life elsewhere, but I've actually never revisited the land. And this photograph I took last Friday, I went back to the site of my childhood home with my twin sister, and we spent some time walking the land, some of the property that was still undeveloped. And I love this photograph because it reminds me that we each have a history and a story, and we each have a connection with a place where we came from. This is what sunrises always looked like to me for the first 18 years of my life. And maybe you can think about sunrises and sunsets in the spaces that you have considered home, and what the land has meant to you and what it's brought to you. And I know that my twin and I and our family's history with this land is brief and only in our lifetime. And before the German immigrants came here and developed it, this was indigenous land. This was the ancestral lands of the Puyallup. When we talk about the climate crisis, there's so many big emotions involved, and I think it's really special to bring us to our humanity in the process. A couple of things that I would love for you to know about me is that I'm not an expert in all this, I'm learning. I've had the privilege of working in climate organizing spaces and organizing in those spaces for the last 3 or 4 years. And also during that time, I was busily working as a single parent to earn my degree. So I actually just graduated in 2019 from the University of Puget Sound. And my degree is in, thanks, Ryan. My degree is in molecular and cellular biology. So I bring a strong background of biology, chemistry, ecosystems, the ideas of patterns in nature and how things work together. I bring all that to my organizing work. Before I went to college, I was a musician. I was in a bunch of bands and I toured and I did a bunch of other stuff. And so music is a huge part of who I am. And that's also part of what I bring to the movement. And these days, live music isn't really happening much, but I'm super passionate about dance and body movement in my backyard, getting me connected to the ground again, and still singing a lot, and doing my best to be a really good parent to the 4 young people that I parent. Okay, but as a biologist, I just want to say I'm kind of obsessed with mushrooms. And as we get into our talk, I just want to share this beautiful quote with you from one of my favorite authors, Adrienne Maree Brown. This is her book, one of many books, We Will Not Cancel Us. And maybe folks are familiar with this book. She's talking about interpersonal relationships in justice movements and how important it is to have healthy interconnectivity with one another, and that none of us can go it alone in this work. I love mycelium and mushrooms and the ways they help forests talk to each other as a biologist. And so I want to invite us to be thinking about mycelium and the ways that we are connected as we have this conversation. So this quote is, mycelium looks much the same way our brains look. Networks of data, communication, nourishment flowing in every direction. They can help us learn how to process conflict and harm into life and beauty. Mycelium helps us see ourselves. So I'll take off my biology nerd hat now, but I just really wanted to share the mycelium and mushrooms and that idea of interconnectivity is a big part of how I see the world and also how I see the movement for climate justice. Okay, so starting a few years ago, I was really fortunate to start volunteering with 350 Tacoma while I was still working on earning my degree and figuring out life. And so I thought I'd share a couple of really fun photos with you from the last few years. This photo here in the upper right of the screen, this is at Wright Park in Tacoma on March 15th of 2019, which feels so long ago. But believe it or not, this was the very first global youth-led climate strike that happened around the world that had been inspired by Greta Thunberg's protest, really just sort of like late summer, fall before. In my own community here, I feel like I've been focusing on trying to recycle and like eat less meat, like really wasn't particularly plugged into any sort of movement per se. But this moment changed everything for me. My youngest son, Theo, was inspired by Greta and began standing out front of our city hall here in Tacoma. And he made a short video and put a call out for other young people in Tacoma. And this climate strike on the playground here in the upper right picture was the result of Theo and I and a handful of other grassroots organizers at 350 Tacoma doing our best to create a space for young people here in Tacoma to have their voices heard. At that point, I really hadn't been a part of any major organizing projects, and it was incredible to see sort of like the baseball analogy from Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. Young people need a space to be able to be heard and share their concerns about the climate crisis. In the bottom left, you'll see the next climate strike, which was that September. This grew into many hundreds of young people in front of City Hall here in Tacoma, and I was really, really grateful to be a big part of that organizing as well. This bottom left photo shows hands down my own favorite organizing moment in my own organizing history. This is when the huge group of the youth-led climate strike standing in front of City Hall was met by the large group of Indigenous-led organizers called Protectors of the Salish Sea, who coincided their 4-day march to Olympia to meet at Tacoma City Hall to show solidarity for one another's causes and to declare a climate emergency in the city and the state as well. And you can see in the center, young people standing with their fists up in just joy and elation at this coming together of the streams of people. And in the bottom right, you can see what's called a tarpie. This is a structure that was erected in front of Chase Bank in Seattle in 2018 as part of a huge demonstration that I was glad to be part of. Other things about me, you can see in that center photo, my youngest son, Theo, at the first climate strike, carrying a simulated windmill on his backpack. I really, really love speaking to young people. And here in Tacoma, before COVID, I did a fair amount of public speaking at colleges and at high schools, helping young people find their way into making a difference in the climate movement and moving beyond their own sense of terror and hopelessness towards empowerment and joy. And with 350, we love using lots of art. So I particularly love leading art workshops with young people. And in the bottom right, you can see this wonderful photograph. I'm in the mix in there somewhere. This is the grand opening of our 350 Tacoma organizing the storefront just a couple of years ago. And here we have our city's mayor, as well as Puyallup Tribal Council members, current and former, as well as so many of my colleagues at 350 Tacoma working to make a difference here. So that's just a little tiny taste of what I've been up to. And in my in my national role and in my regional role, I've had the privilege of getting to start getting involved more behind the scenes in some campaign work. And I'll share a bit about this later, but I've been helping to support 350 Washington's legislative campaign, which is called the Civic Action Team. And I'm really thrilled to be helping support folks across the state of Washington advocating for sound and just climate policy. So obviously most of the organizing work I'm doing right now is from home on my computer. And I'm also a coach and a mentor to all the 350 groups in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Alaska, where we bounce ideas off of each other and work on making a difference in each of those communities. Okay, so here's my big oof slide. I like to think of the 20s that we're in. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks of it this way, as the climate decade. We know that the IPCC has reported and estimated that we really have just about 10 years left to make profound, sweeping, transformational changes in the way that we consume and use energy and where our energy is coming from. If we're going to stop ourselves from moving past 1.5 degrees of warming towards global catastrophe, permanent loss of ice caps within our own children's lifetimes, profound species loss, loss of global ocean currents, loss of global ocean food webs, and the kind of nightmare scenarios that take your breath away. When I first started understanding the urgency and the scope of the climate crisis, my first response was like panic, anger, terror. But I want to invite us to also think of this as an opportunity for a new way of being. And for myself as a white person and for other white identifying folks in this space, I want to particularly challenge us to remember that while we are in crisis, the ways that we do this work and the ways that we are with each other actually really matter. And often for folks in white spaces, there's this culture of urgency and crisis, and I'm going to go it alone and just like burn the candle at both ends. And it can help alleviate some of our personal panic, but I think I'll say from personal experience that you can only burn the candle at both ends for so long. And actually, this is not even a marathon. This is lifelong work. And so how we do this work actually really matters. And I'm gonna enjoy getting into that a bit. First, I just kind of realized that maybe some folks on this call know what 350.org is, and maybe some folks don't. So I'm just going to take a little tiny moment to talk about that. So what are we all about? Our kind of three big things are a fast and just transition towards 100% renewable energy for all, no new fossil fuel projects anywhere, and not a penny more for dirty energy. Those are kind of like our really big things. That's what we focus on. And ultimately, we know the path to getting there means building a multiracial organization that can organize and mobilize a multiracial base. We know that we must build and deepen the grassroots climate justice movement. We need to build widespread public blame for climate impacts and project impacts get that blame on the fossil fuel industry. And we want to build political opposition to the fossil fuel industry and support for a just transition. Brian's probably really familiar with this, and maybe other folks are familiar with the HEMES principles. This is a set of principles that were created in 1966 in New Mexico at a gathering of Indigenous and frontline communities and organizations, putting together the best practices principles for how to do climate and environmental justice work. We know we want to focus on being inclusive. We We put an emphasis on grassroots or bottom-up organizing. And ultimately, we want to let people speak for themselves. We work together in solidarity and mutuality, and we build just relationships among ourselves, kind of like mushrooms. Everything's connected. I put a fancy little red arrow next to this last one here, and that is commitment to self-transformation. And in our conversation today, I want to be continuing to invite us to be thinking about this piece in terms of our own understanding of the connections between racial injustice, the climate crisis, and the varying degrees of power and privilege that each of us may carry, and what a commitment to self-transformation can look like in this moment. So I like to highlight that one. As I said earlier, there's a question that I hear often floating around, which is like, the climate crisis is so urgent and we only have 10 years. As climate organizers, is it a distraction or a waste of our time to like throw down and support the movement for Black lives, or throw down and support immigrants at the border and children in cages, or throw down and get involved with our politics and the fact that we just had an insurrection? And so there's all this sort of sense of like, there's all these different crises happening. Which one should I pay attention to? What about COVID? What about this? I think one of the most fascinating things is that these aren't actually separate issues. And it can be really empowering to understand that we're actually all working towards transforming the same oppressive systems that were brought to us by white supremacy and colonialism and extractive capitalism. So as a climate organizer, I'm thrilled to be able to advocate for all the good things as part of my work and to not separate that out. And in fact, for our statewide climate legislative campaign that's currently happening here in Washington State, with 350 Washington, we advocate for climate policies and racial justice policies as part of our intersectional approach to dismantling these oppressive systems. I want to share this really wonderful quote with you all from Hop Hopkins, who is has a great name, and he's with the Sierra Club nationally. He wrote a fantastic article called "Racism is Killing the Planet." And I love this. You can't have climate change without sacrifice zones. And you can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people. And you can't have disposable people without racism. And so this idea that somehow white supremacy and racism is this bad thing that like affects some people over here, and then the climate crisis is this thing over here, is so important for us to actually connect the dots with that heavy industry, the fossil fuel industry, chemical industries. These are all built on the model that it's okay to destroy some people and some parts of the planet in order to make other parts wealthy. And that's the imbalance that we're in. And at its heart is racism. And Brian, I might actually invite you to drop the link to these slides in the chat. I want to let folks know that my slideshow today has tons of links and great videos in it that I'm not going to like make everybody look at right now, but you're welcome to take with you as a resource for learning more. Okay, so you're welcome to go on a little thought journey with me right now. For my own personal journey, I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, when I heard the term global warming, or even the climate crisis as it was starting to get called, for me, images always popped in my mind of like starving polar bears and like oil spills on birds and like those truly really awful, devastating things happening in nature. A lot of that, I will say, like a lot of that messaging and imagery is the result of the fact that environmental and climate organizations for many decades have predominantly been a white-dominated space with some pretty strong narratives around what's important and who's important in the world. Sort of lumping all people into one category as the bad guys, and then all of nature into another category. But we know that actually the climate crisis is an intersecting crises of all of the different systems of oppression. And so actually, I would invite folks to close your eyes if you'd like to, and just kind of check in with your own self. I like to do this thought experiment. When I go ahead and picture polar bears, maybe swimming in the cold sea and unable to find the ice that they need to hunt and survive, and the emotions that stirs inside of for me are tragedy, sadness, hopelessness, and that it's really not fair. And I'd also like you to picture in your mind other images of what the climate crisis is. Migrant families at the border, escaping their homelands. Maybe they were farmers in the mountains of Guatemala where the environment has changed permanently and can't sustain life anymore. Maybe the family will be separated and the children put in cages. And I would invite you to check in with yourself about how you feel about those mental pictures. For me, decades of mentally picturing polar bears was never enough to get me to do anything about the climate crisis, because it felt distant and far away and sad. But personally, I'm kind of all about people at the end of the day. And when I started personally making connections that the climate crisis was about people and was about disparate impacts on Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and communities of color, then I began to understand this as my own deep human need to respond to human crisis, and to examine my own privilege and power in that space as well. And I would say, I think for me, it wasn't until I understood the climate crisis as a humanitarian crisis that I understood how and why to act. Yeah, thanks for doing some mental picturing with me, folks. So I'm not going to play this video here right now with us, but this is a really great new video from 350.org that kind of paints a big picture of what the movement for climate justice is and can be locally and globally. And I want us to be asking ourselves the question, knowing that sort of the environmental spaces, environmental movement has traditionally been very dominated by white people. How do we actually move forward from that history towards what true climate justice looks like? And I'm just going to spend a little bit of time going through some interesting information, in particular looking at why the climate crisis is connected to Black lives, to Indigenous lives, to immigrants and refugees, and even to our politics, our democracy, and to corporate power. So last summer, when George Floyd was murdered, we saw a huge uprising again for the movement for Black lives, demanding accountability for police violence against Black people. And I know at that time, many folks were sort of feeling like this is a very big, important thing, but it is maybe separate and distinct from the climate crisis. At 350.org, we have a really strong commitment to racial justice and to dismantling white supremacy. And 350.org was actually one of the first environmental organizations in the US to align with the movement for Black lives and show support for defunding police. The reason for that is we understand that Black communities are not just devalued through state-sanctioned violence, but also through environmental racism, Low-income Black communities are intentionally zoned into neighborhoods right by factories and highways and pipelines, and through redlining laws. When we hear George Floyd, and quite a number of years ago, Eric Garner as well, saying, "I can't breathe," it's really important to think about environmental justice also in terms of air quality and how Black and Brown communities have been targeted for decades and decades and been at the front lines of environmental racism. And so when we think about climate justice, we can't forget about how it's been white supremacy all along that's been aiming to snuff out the life of Black people, metaphorically and literally. And climate and the climate crisis is that threat multiplier. So in order to gain the collective liberation that we do need to be more radical and more nimble and more intersectional in our own work by showing up in meaningful and intentional ways for Black people. So at 350.org, we are demanding interconnected systems change, not one or the other, but changing all of the systems. And ultimately, we understand that as we're calling for divestment from the fossil fuel industry, we can also be calling for divestment from the police state that disproportionately harms Black people, Brown people, Indigenous people, and communities of color. We also know that the climate crisis is all about destroying Indigenous lives and communities. If folks are familiar with the concept of the term of missing and murdered Indigenous women, but this is essentially the impact that pipeline construction and fossil fuel infrastructure construction has had, is having, and will continue to have on the Indigenous communities that it rampages through, including incredibly high numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We know that the fossil fuel industry does not care about getting consent or working with tribes, but about extracting and taking. And this isn't one or two instances in the past, they're present. This is endemic and it's everywhere. And folks can probably even name fossil fuel fights that you're aware of that are harming Indigenous communities as well. And we know that Indigenous communities actually carry the wisdom and the practices for living sustainably and healthily with the natural world and are leaders in this movement. So this is, I spoke a little bit earlier about immigrants and refugees, and there's this really wonderful article here, The Case for Climate Reparations. One of my favorite things about it is it's this idea of mobility. So here in the US, in the global north, we are accustomed to a certain amount of mobility. We can go here, well, maybe before COVID, we can go here or there via an airplane or our car, and we can be global citizens, we can travel. It's sometimes very challenging for us to link that version of mobility with the forced mobility that the folks in the global south, who are emitting way less than we are forced into mobility to move due to the climate crisis impacting the livability of their homes. And I think it's really important to point out that the climate crisis destabilizes spaces that are already extracted from and destabilized, forcing migrations. And that can easily lead into fear of immigrants. Let's create internment camps. Let's be afraid of these folks who need shelter. And this is actually a global phenomenon we're seeing in many countries, which is the rise of fascism, fueled by the fuel of immigrants, which is many, many times the result of the climate crisis on communities, which is occurring because of the high consumption of those first world highly developed nations. And it's a vicious cycle that will continue down a dark path unless we're able to really interrupt that system and that cycle. I have a couple other slides here that I'm not going to go in too deeply, but I think it's really important, and there's some great resources here if folks want to look at them later as well. We recently saw a huge attack on our democracy here in the US, and we know that American democracy is unraveling and under some incredible pressures. So important to be able to draw the connections, understanding that it's actually the fossil fuel industry and other huge corporate interests that are driving our loss of democracy, who are investing in things like the insurrection, and that the climate change and fascism are all deeply connected, and our ability to protect our democracy is essential to our ability to build the sustainable future that we need. During this time of deep destabilization, as the globe is changing, we also want to be aware that the government's response to crisis is generally to create more levels of policing and to make protesting illegal. And these are all things that we're seeing right now in the US. So the climate crisis is sort of touching our political spheres. It's touching us at every possible space. And ultimately, this is a really great quote. It's important to remember that there's basically three big global interests that are driving this. The fossil fuel companies are seeking a profit, governments want to seek energy security, and private investors want financial security. And so the continued push towards fascism and authoritarianism in the world will directly benefit fossil fuel companies while harming the rest of us. And finally, I really, really love this quote here about the fascist four really big corporations in America that actually helped fund the Capitol riots, including Amazon and Google. And this last line here is that racial capitalism has made white supremacy profitable, and only dismantling these structures will allow our country to move forward. So it's going to be a cinch. Now we know what to do, right? That's kind of a lot, and it's okay to sit with that for a moment. All of these systems of white supremacy, of extractive capitalism, they're all teaming up and working together to make the climate crisis the inevitable outcome of putting profits over people. So let's just take down these systems. How do we do this? I'm grateful again for mushrooms for reminding me that the path forward is not for me to become a super organizer. While I was earning my degree and being a single parent and helping run 350 Tacoma, I think I was really operating under the belief that like, this is such a big crisis, I just need to keep working harder. But lately, I've really been feeling strongly that the solution is actually connecting with more people and deepening my community connections, inviting more people into the movement, and recognizing that there is space for everyone in the movement for climate justice. I'm also chronically ill and disabled, and those two pieces of my identity have brought some really heavy lessons with them about how I can't actually do it all alone, and interconnectivity is the way forward. All right, so here's the good news. Everything is possible through grassroots people power. This is a photograph of mycelium, the hyphae underground of mushrooms, and how everything's connected. I know that grass is a plant and mushrooms are not a plant, but bear with me. When I think of grassroots, I really do think of mycelium. Grassroots has always helped us to transform what is even politically possible. And we're going to continue to follow the lead of grassroots organizing. All of the good movements from LGBTQ rights to civil rights to all of the water protector movements, all of these have come from the power of grassroots and grassroots voices. And grassroots thought leadership raised the call to end the racist practices that have been endemic in the environmental movement and in climate and environmental organizations and spaces. And ultimately, we know that grassroots organizing shows us that another world is possible. And as the original climate stewards, we know that Black, Indigenous, and people of color worldwide have led the way in this movement. And so when we talk about grassroots organizing and building people power, we want to be talking about following local leadership on the ground, following the voices of those who have been invested in and doing this work for a long, long time. And thinking about how each of our identities, privileges, and power play into our ability to contribute well to the grassroots movement in ways that isn't just putting our own egos and selves on a pedestal, but that is contributing to the better whole. So I love the saying that the antidote to hopelessness is action. We know that each of us are inundated with choices all day, like paper or plastic, or to get a car or not get a car, and to eat meat or to not eat meat. And those are all really powerful personal choices. But when we think of grassroots power, and when we think about how when we think about 350.org and sort of our approach, it's always in the larger framework of being part of a movement and part of a very large systems change space. So each of our individual actions are important, but ultimately we want to be inviting people into spaces where we can take collective action that is in service to the planet as a whole. And we want systems level solutions. So the beverage industry can make us all feel bad for not recycling our bottles, but we know that they started the industry in the first place with all these disposable bottles. So we want to continue to think about what systems are actually creating the problems and how can we collectively transform those. The climate decade's just a heavy moment. It's a heavy moment to be a person. I want to invite each of you to maybe take a scrap of paper, or maybe you just kind of like to think with your eyes closed, to think about who you are in this moment. None of us is separated from these truths, these things, these facts that are happening around us. What does it mean to be on the precipice of something so big? What does it mean to have the power to make such big change? And as we think about who each of us is, think about we each have identities and stories, skills, talents, and experiences, as well as relationships and connections in our communities. We have strengths and we definitely have weaknesses and things we're not good at. We have things we need to learn and grow in. We're also each a witness to this moment. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And also, as a biologist, I just want to remind us that none of us are separate from nature. We're a product of the planet, and our own personal fates and the fates of our children are intertwined with all of life. And so what happens to folks in Syria or on our own borders is part of us too, as human beings. And as we're reflecting on who each of us is, I want to invite each of us to remember that we're allowed to step into the climate movement imperfectly. I know I've personally had a lot of hesitation around, like, how do we even talk about race as a white person? And what if I haven't done enough homework? And what if I make a mistake? There's space for gracious learning and for doing our best. And this is also not a time to sit on the sidelines. All right, well, I'm going to close up here, and I would love to invite us maybe into a dialogue if this has stirred up any questions or thoughts or reflections for folks. But for my last slide, I want to invite everybody to slide 24. These are 3 levels of ways that you are invited to get involved with 350 stuff, with climate justice movement stuff. Maybe folks already have their hands full and you're organizing locally, and that's great. Brian is part of 350 Spokane. So right in Spokane, you all have a fabulous, tremendous 350 group of grassroots organizers. And I'm so excited that y'all are doing an oil trains action with the Sunrise group the tail end of this month. And that's part of the National Build Back Fossil Free efforts. Statewide, we have our 350 Washington Civic Action Team, which is that climate and racial justice legislative action campaign that I'm helping to run. So if you want to get involved in advocating at a statewide level, these are really simple advocacy steps. It's an email that comes out twice a week to let you know what's happening and how to take action. It's a lot of fun, and we have a lot of kitten memes because Civic Action Team acronym is CAT. And nationally, we are organizing in the Build Back Fossil Free Coalition nationally to help bring an end to Line 3, which is a huge pipeline currently under construction in Minnesota, as well as the Dakota Access Pipeline. And so this is a huge national event. And I linked here to a toolkit. If you're interested in engaging in this week of action, there's some fantastic events happening and you can learn all about it and even start your own event with that toolkit. Other big things that we have happening nationally that we're really excited about is the Green New Deal and also the Thrive Agenda, which is all about building back better for all. I feel like I could talk for hours, but I definitely don't want to do that to folks. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to hear from me, hear from my experiences. Here's a little moment with me and my dog, Nina. She's not terribly into the color pink, as you can tell from her face, but I did make her wear a pink sweater to match mine for this cute moment. And I just want to thank you, Brian, for inviting me into this space. And I hope that this information and these shares felt really good for folks. And yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Grace. This is a wonderful opportunity to talk about just about the most important issues we could, right? And so you've been very gracious in helping us to connect some of these ideas. And I would welcome people, if you have a comment or a question, I think the most effective way to start that would be probably to use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. And I'd be happy to invite you to unmute yourself. And another way would be to, if you would rather, you can just type a question in the chat and Grace or I can field it there. If you're feeling shy, feel free also just to send a message to me privately, which you're welcome to do as well. And then I can pose the question to Grace. So any questions for Grace? Comments? All right, so our first question is from Jordan. I'm going to invite you to unmute, Jordan, if you'd like. Feel free.
Yes, so I had a question. I noticed on one of your slides, one of the goals of 350.org is to build a multiracial organization. And I know that that's traditionally been a challenge for environmentalism as a whole, since it kind of has a history of whiteness and a lot of erasure. So what are some of the strategies that 360.org employs to kind of get underrepresented or marginalized communities into the conversation when it comes to climate justice and just how do you seek to get those communities involved?
Jordan, this is the best question. Thank you. Thanks for sharing it. Yeah, so a little bit of history of 350.org was started just over 10 years ago, maybe 11 or 12 years ago, by a gentleman named Bill McKibben, who's an older white man, and it was started at a university with a handful of students. And for quite a few years, 350.org was predominantly white staffed nonprofit. And starting about, I'm going to say about 3 years ago, before I came on board, 350 made some radical changes to their hiring practices. And now 350 US staff, I'm going to give a rough estimate, but I think it's about over 75% people of color. And so it's, and predominantly women, and also a significant amount of queer folks as well. So at the US staffing level, 350.org is led by, organized by, and our work is led and organized by Black people, brown people, and people of color at the national organizational level. In addition, we have national partners that we're continually working to stay in good relationship with. So we are formally partners with the Movement for Black Lives, with labor groups, and with a significant number of sort of big national spaces. So we're always working to stay in good relationship with all the moving pieces of the movement for justice in our national work. At the local level, we have many, many different local groups all across the US. We've got about 175 or so active groups right now. And we have ongoing support and training, mentorship and guidance for all of our local groups in how to be building long-term, healthy allyship relationships with the frontline Indigenous and Black communities in their own spaces, in their own regions, as well as how to move their local organizations towards being themselves multiracial organizations as modeled by the national organization. All that to say that this is an ongoing work and practice of how can 350.org's values influence the way all of our local groups behave, and also just continuing to remember that when 350.org is stepping out and calling folks into action, we always want to be very, very clearly framing that in the larger movement for climate justice, so that our followers and fans and very broad base across the US is continuing to get very clear messaging about the connections between racial justice and climate justice. So I would say I see a really big commitment at the 350.org side to making sure that we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk about who we want to be in the future.
Thanks, Grace. I've got a question from a direct message from an attendee. Actually, two questions, and I'll let you pick which one you'd like to start with in our 4 minutes or so we've got left. So first question is thoughts about learning to organize through organizations such as the Green Corps, if you know. And secondly, could you speak to the Red New Deal versus the Green New Deal, a more Indigenous approach?
Oh yeah, these are both great questions. I don't actually think I know what the green, what was it called? The Green
Corps?
Green Corps. I'm not actually familiar with that. So I don't have a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but I would say that anywhere that you can be learning how to organize from really solid grassroots organizing spaces that have a strong commitment to racial justice as part of their practice is a great place to learn organizing. And so I've heard a couple of different terms. I've heard the Green New Deal. I've also heard one called, I could be getting it wrong, but the Red and Green and Black New Deal. And I know that at the national level, 350.org is in relationship, in good relationship with the Indigenous-led organizations and spaces that are proposing these things. And so I know internally there's conversations about how to support the policies coming out of those spaces as well. And I'm really curious to see how it all comes together. Yeah.
Well, we're just about out of time. I want to post a few things in the chat. If we could start off, first of all, using our reactions at least to thank Grace for sharing these thoughts. The first thing you'll notice, well, actually not the first, the second thing in the chat there, this was recorded. And so it will live on our past events page. And I encourage you, it should be there within the next few weeks. You can find it there on the ENVS events page. There you can also find that information about our future events. In particular, I want to draw your attention to that Environmental Justice Symposium next week, which is important. And then finally, I wanted to mention that Governor Inslee and Bill McKibben, who's the founder that Grace mentioned, and Kaya Chatterjee, the executive director of the U.S. Climate Action Network, are all participating in the launch of Gonzaga's new Center for Climate Society and the Environment. It was just announced this week. And so if you haven't done so already, I'd encourage you to go to the link in the chat there, gonzaga.edu/climate center, and you can learn more and register for that event. So I hope that all of you had a really great afternoon lunch hour with us. And thank you again, Grace, for joining us and sharing this really important work.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. And I want to just share again this book that just recently came out, All We Can Save, has really been a lifeline for me as an organizer. All written by women in the climate movement across many, many disciplines, everything from poetry to essays. And they've also started something called All We Can Save Circles, which is basically like little pods or kind of book discussion groups for folks to start up in their communities. And I see this as a really transformational, incredible framework for helping folks put the climate crisis into the broader framework of the Indigenous-led and Black-led movement for liberation that we truly need in order to stop the climate crisis.
It's a really good book. I agree. I recommend it as well. I'm already using one of the readings in my class this semester and recommend it to all of you. And so take a look at that. It's a good one.
And I just want to say, as a person who just finally graduated not that long ago, this is so great to have a chance to be in a school space with you all, and best of luck to everyone here who's working hard towards a degree. There is such thing as graduation day. It feels amazing and you will get a job when you're done. It just will happen. Those are all my big worries when I was in school.
Thank you so much, Grace. Good luck. Bye, everybody.